Hello and welcome to PerchPeek Pods, the only place to get long form interviews with some of the world's leading global mobility experts. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Sharon Lion, Global Mobility Director at Einride. Sharon, welcome to the podcast. Say hi to the community and tell us how you fell into the world of mobility.
Absolutely. Hi, Paul. Thank you. Great to be here with you today. So I think probably as with most people you've spoken to, I fell into the world of global mobility by accident. I started many years ago as a psychology graduate and kind
Wow.
of wanting to go into something people related. I actually wanted to be a psychologist when I left, but I was moving to London and couldn't afford to support myself studying for many more years to qualify as anything.
Yeah,
So,
nice.
thought I'd get myself a kind of a proper grown-up job in the meantime, and started, in the Big Four. My background is in expat tax, actually. So
Mm,
that was what sort of introduced me, to the world of global mobility. So I was, based in London for the first kind of 14, 15 years of my career with PwC. I then, relocated to Stockholm and was based there, switched to a different Big Four. I was then with Deloitte for 5 years or so in Stockholm, but also kind of, within expat tax.
yeah,
And then I had an opportunity to, move to my current role, at Einride, which is a scale-up, a tech scale-up, climate-focused mission with, in the electric autonomous freight transport
yes.
sector.
I,
So, uh, totally kind of different to what I'd done before. But I think building on lots of learnings that I had from my sort of years in consulting,
I love that.
and yeah, it was, and I think what I would say is that the benefit of that sort of background is just that you have the opportunity to work with so many different companies. You
Mm,
see like a whole range of mobility solutions, and you work with kind of very large programs with huge expat populations, particularly when I was based in London, and then other programs or where it might just be an odd move here or there and a couple of people and much more tailored case specific advice. So you really do get a kind of a flavor of lots of different approaches to mobility and how lots
yes.
do it.
Well, a lot to unpack there, Sharon, but I'm actually going to go right back to the start with you started off doing expat taxes. And I remember being a bit intimidated when I first came into the industry at this sort of horde of people from Big Four that did expat taxes and not really being sure exactly what that means. But that is like the backbone of our industry. So obviously lots of people listening will come from a Big Four background, but for those that don't or come from an immigration or just aren't that familiar, what does it mean when you say you're doing expat taxes? What does your day-to-day look like in that world?
Yeah, so I think when you start out in those type of roles, you're usually doing quite. So I started out in the UK, so it was kind of UK focused tax advice. So you're working with companies who are either headquartered, like I was working with companies who are either headquartered in London and have like large kind of outbound assignee populations to other countries, or otherwise where they're headquartered somewhere else in the world and they have an inbound population kind of coming into the UK as well. The core of sort of a Big Four offering, I suppose, is, the compliance. So it's covering
Mm,
individual expat tax returns and tax briefings. So that's kind of what you're doing day to day in the beginning. And I think that's although when I started it, I really wasn't sure if it was what I would want to do long term. And honestly, I don't think I even realized I was stumbling into a tax role. It had kind of been advertised as like an HR services kind of team at that time or something.
interesting.
So I thought it was more HR related. And then I was kind of slightly horrified to discover that I had to do some quite hardcore UK tax exams in my first year that I was home. So, but having kind of successfully sort of got
Yeah.
through those, uh, I think what I really enjoyed was just that, even at an early stage, it's a very kind of people facing role, and you get to meet all of the kind of expats. In the days when we all met kind of in real life face to face, I would be going to my kind of clients' offices and often spending an entire day meeting a whole kind of bunch of expats from like different countries. And I just love that. I love the sort of opportunity to be kind of in front of people straight away and just chatting to them about their like impressions of moving to the UK, or kind of
Mm.
what they were worried about moving away from the UK, and just kind of, finding out how it was, impacting their families. And you sort of have, so, of course you're giving your core advice, but just having that opportunity to like meet people with such a broad range of experiences was like really fun. And I
Yeah.
think what really kind of got my attention in the early days. And I think as well, like with the companies you're working with, in a lot of professional jobs, it's not until you get to a sort of senior level that you're able to have kind of client relationships. As a junior person, you're kind of in the background. But I think in a mobility team, in the beginning, okay, you're not directly speaking to the head of global mobility, but actually they have a whole team that you need to support. And so you might be speaking to, a more junior person in HR and helping them with what they're doing more operationally linked
Yeah.
to the kind of assignments. Or, often you're speaking to the payroll people actually who are struggling to put funny tax reliefs and things in the payroll, and sort of
Yeah.
helping them to know what that's look like, and what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of core of it. And I think as you go on, you then sort of start to get a higher level view as you sort of move through, and
Mm.
you consult on a broader aspect, so not just your country tax system, but
Yeah.
more general advisory around how to structure assignments in a tax efficient way, moving from one country to another. You work a lot with the international networks in the firms and get to know colleagues in
Mm.
lots of different countries. So I always found that really fun as well,
Yeah.
working kind of global teams all over the world
Yeah.
to kind of pull advice together for a client.
You feel in the thick of it, and I said we'd go off script, so here we go. You did a couple of Big Four roles, then you moved to an in-house role. I know people are always thinking, like, how useful is that Big Four experience when you're in the belly of the beast and you're sort of in an in-house role? Is it sort of partly useful? Is it completely transferable? What were your learnings from making that jump?
Yeah. I think it was very useful and transferable actually, and it probably depends to some extent on the type of company that you go into. I think what had been helpful with the kind of number of different companies I'd worked with and the different sizes and so on is that you have a sense of kind of what works well for different countries and what doesn't work well. And so when we joined Einride, I was sort of coming in at quite an early stage in the business. There was no existing kind of mobility function or role, and so I was very much creating that from scratch. And so I kind of faced with a blank piece of paper. How would you want to set up a mobility program? And I think because I had a good sense of what I'd seen that did and didn't work well, it gives you a good kind of starting point for that. And I think as well, when you're kind of consulting, you often get brought in to help companies when, not always, because a lot goes right as well, but when things have
Yeah,
gone wrong,
exactly.
particularly with smaller companies, they might have had no kind of mobility type advice or person, but the HR team have kind of like moved someone around, and then, they haven't done it in a kind of a good way. They've got some kind of payroll tax audit or whatever, and you have to kind of come in and fix it. And so I think you also, it then gives you a sense of what the risk areas are and what you
I
need to
love
kind
that.
of focus on. Probably, these sorts of things I can overlook, or they're less of a big deal. But actually, I've seen clients have been pulled up a lot of times for not doing this thing. So this area of compliance I want to focus on. So I think those type of things, which are hard to kind of, they're hard to learn. You just get a general sense of them from
Yeah,
having seen them lots of times and working with lots of different companies.
I love
I'd say
that.
that's been.
I love that. Yeah, it sort of gives you that breadth to almost know what not to do as well as what to do at times. So that takes us nicely onto the blank piece of paper you mentioned at Enride. Every mobility person's dream, setting up a program from scratch. How did you even think about starting it from scratch? What did you do? How did you decide to do it?
Yeah. I think the first thing is always kind of getting to know the business you're working in and understanding what their priorities are, where they're likely to sort of grow in the future and so on. And I will say that was a bit tricky in the beginning because when I joined, we were Swedish headquartered business. We were about to open a US kind of entity. We had well quite very ambitious growth plans in terms of uh, uh, like in overall kind of employee size in of the company, but also expanding into quite a few different markets in Europe as well. And at the beginning, I didn't really know. I had the sense that in a sort of scale up, obviously things move very quickly. I could suddenly be asked to kind of, right, we need to move someone here to here. We're doing this. It needs to happen fast. But having that sense of, okay, whatever I set up, I have to be ready for anything. I don't actually really know what that's going to be yet. And so it was quite important to just get the right partners in place in the early days that could kind of support me so that, you know, not being able to tell them in the beginning what countries I would need to support or how many people it would be, just get the bare kind of bones in place. And actually the priority that was, you know, in my first few weeks, sort of meeting senior people in the business and trying to kind of, you know, get a feel for where it would go. The first thing I was asked to do by CFO was actually to just put together, can you help us define what our kind of international hiring strategy should look like? You know, we want to grow. We don't know how to do that in a good way. How do we and it was actually starting very much at the beginning with explaining to the business, you know, why can't we just put everyone on a Swedish employment contract and hire them anywhere in the world? And
I love
so to
that.
a mobility person, that seems kind of obvious, but I did so then I put together some internal guidance, you know, this is why you need, you know, this is where you should have an employment contract. These are the sorts of things we need to be compliant in as an employer. We need to be able to run a payroll. We need to make, you know, and this kind of list of like reasons why you couldn't just use a Swedish employment contract in any country. That was the kind of starting point. And then agreeing, you know, it was fun in those early days when we were quite small. You've got the kind of it was very easy to sit down with the kind of CFO, the head of legal, head of finance, because you know these teams started out as only one or two people, and they of
Exactly.
course but we were a small group kind of making these decisions. So then I could kind of suggest something to the group, get all the sort of key stakeholders on board, and then push out internal guidance around that so that the business units, you know, had something to lean on and follow. And actually, what we did in those early days, we pretty much did kind of keep to. So in terms of when we would use um, uh, you know, if we preferred relocations, when we would use employer of record solutions,
Mm.
all of those kind of things. And actually, before thinking about mobility policies and so on in the traditional sense, the first partner I actually kind of went out and looked for was an employer of record partner because,
Wow.
you know, we were signing some contracts in the Netherlands and Germany. We needed to get employees there quickly, and we didn't yet have an entity set up. So that, you know,
So
it actually
many, yeah.
starts in that more kind of, yeah, strategic business advisory place rather than
Yeah.
me just thinking, "Oh, this will be
And
fun. What can I do as a
it's
mobility program? Let's set
exactly.
up some long-term plans."
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it sounds sounds like, you know, you have things that people so rarely don't have. You've got C-suite invisibility, you've got that almost blank sheet of paper, you don't have to unwind everything. You've got that almost strategic, hey, what is the long-term strategy? What did what did you end up recommending? Put some meat on the bone in terms of like how do you I know people still struggle with this a lot. How do you decide whether to relocate someone or whether to let them work remotely via an EOR? Like, how did you decide
Yeah.
what to recommend in terms of that strategy?
Yeah. So I think a lot of that comes down to what kind of company culture you want to create. So, you know, that's very much working closely with the sort of HR teams to sort of define that. And I was part of the HR team, so that was kind of quite natural for me. We wanted to kind of foster a sort of spirit of creativity. We like to have teams that are kind of able to be together in person and kind of have that sort of sense of innovation, which we felt, you know, was more difficult to do remotely. So I think we decided from the beginning that we wouldn't be a kind of a remote first company, and we preferred to kind of gather people in places where they were needed. So, if kind of the recruiters were sort of looking for specific talent and they kind of found them in different countries, then, the first thing to think about was, do we have an entity in that country? And also, what role are you hiring them for? So, are they based somewhere different, but they actually have a Swedish role and their team is going to be, where is their team based? Who are they reporting to? We would rather that they sat with their team. So, relocation was kind of preferred as a first option. And also, I kind of knew that that would be more straightforward actually than setting people up with complex kind of cross-border type traveling
It's
arrangements.
tough.
Lots of Yeah, we definitely ended up with some of those as well, but that
Yeah.
wasn't our kind of start point. Um, and then in the new locations, the employer of record, I think this was um, a few years ago, and I guess those companies sprung up during off the back of COVID, and it was just after kind of COVID that I'd kind of joined. So they hadn't really been tested, and I think because I'd come from that tax compliance background, I was a little bit nervous with them,
Yes.
and I wasn't sure if they would stand up to scrutiny longer term. Would there be challenges from tax authorities and so on? So I actually wanted to use them in a bit of a cautious way to start with, and use them as more of an interim solution. So, only in locations where we intended to have an entity and a presence in future. And then we would use that with the intention that they'd be transferred to our entity longer term. And I didn't want to kind of agree to having a very scattered remote population supported by employer of record solutions.
I love that. Yeah, it seems simple at the start to be like, yeah, just put them on a EOR, employee of record anywhere. And then it's like down the line, you don't want to be figuring out like one random complication and somewhere else. Yeah, like somewhere down the line, it does come back to bite. So tell us then, how did you try to, it sounds like you were intimately involved. How did you try to decide when it was worth it to think about, okay, this is somewhere we would want to set up an entity? Because that's something that quite a lot of people struggle with, is like, oh, what's like the
Yeah.
tipping point through which we think, oh yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah. So we'd thought about that in advance, and we'd thought about, would we do it based on kind of a certain number of employees and that kind of thing. But actually in the end, I didn't really have to kind of, or we as a business didn't have to make those decisions, because we had different sort of business drivers to set up entities. So we were often applying for government funding, for example, environmental type grants that were available, or we needed to kind of register vehicles, and those type of things always required an entity. So actually for us, it was usually an early stage business driver to set up an entity. So that kind of made that whole conversation easier. I didn't really have to. Yeah, we never did it on the basis of number of employees, but I think in advance, we were sort of thinking that if it was getting, up to 10 employees was probably okay, but it was a bit of a, once you get to 10, let's kind of reevaluate, and how senior are they? What are they doing? So that
Yes,
was the sort of thing we were thinking we would have to go
I
through.
love.
But
Yes,
yeah, as it happened, when it came to it, we didn't, because there was already typically already an entity
yeah.
kind of waiting.
Mm.
So
And it sounds like you have built like a very modern relocation good mobility program. You know, you're handling EOR, you're handling remote work. You've got a bit of location strategy in there, which I think is so good for mobility to help with. What what else ended up being? You mentioned finding the right partners to help you sort of be ready. What else sort of ended up being part of your world in mobility? What else came into your orbit?
yeah. So I mean, obviously I did have I did also like build out more traditional kind of relocation policies and so on. I was responsible for immigration globally, which actually wasn't something I'd done before I kind of came
Okay.
to Einride.
Yeah.
So I had to, again, like but I think, you're never going to be an expert in all countries or all things you need to do in mobility. So I think you always have to rely heavily on your kind of partners, and I had
Yeah.
a very good partner who really worked to help me kind of learn immigration in the main locations we had in the
Mm,
early days. So building those kind of very strong vendor relationships was super important for me.
mm.
And because, yeah, you are working at fast pace and you often need answers quickly. So you need that kind of your vendors that you have a good working relationship, and when you kind of call on that advice, they can provide it quickly, and particularly with kind of immigration actually. So I had really sort of good partners to support there. There were also, like, because we were such an early stage company, I mean, like, there were so many areas where I could just sort of see that things weren't in place where I had some expertise or knowledge and I could help. So it was very much a question of, if there's a need, you just kind of put your hand up and say, "Hey, I'll kind of help with that." And actually, I love that, like, kind of startup scale up mentality, which I really felt when I joined. That you're trying to sort of achieve something that no one's done before. Everyone who's hired has slightly different skills and experience, and everyone kind of contribute that in a good way in order to make the whole kind of thing work. So it was really nice to feel sort of
Yes.
part of the broader business puzzle in that sense. So
What's
business travel was an example of that,
mm,
where I just, we didn't have a corporate travel provider, and I obviously wanted to track people for kind of compliance reasons, and so I said, okay, as a very starting point here, we need a travel provider so we can track people's travel and know where our employees are. So I worked with the finance team to kind of source a travel provider, and then kind of was the sort of main contact for that
I
vendor
love that.
relationship. I will say that I slightly regretted putting my hand up for that one.
Well, because this is, I think it's quite in vogue for mobility to become more involved with business travel. Typically, it's
Yeah.
sort of, typically it's, you know, trying to sort out the mess of compliance down the line. But here you've got to own the baby from the start, so to speak. What were the regrets, like, having been in the trenches of business travel? What was the highs and lows of it?
Oh, no, it was more just, you get I because I was then kind of known as the contact for the travel provider, I you then get kind of bogged down by, like, individual problems that employees are having when their travels get rearranged and they've had this problem or that. And so
Interesting.
getting, like, that was what I didn't really want to get dragged into having to sort out for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're the sort of this me for whenever a flight gets cancelled, and you're okay. That's not really what I signed up for. That's a very, 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 very wide. Oh, and tell us, with our mobility hats on that compliance perspective, what you mentioned you wanted to be able to track. Tell us more about what you were trying to achieve from a compliance perspective with business travel. Like, what did you want
Yeah.
from that?
And I would say that I haven't, like, yet got to that stage of where I
Okay.
want to get to, because
Yeah.
I think, so I'd worked a lot with kind of business travel, like, and consulting around that at the Big Four. So I was very
Yeah.
conscious of the kind of the risks and the things I needed to look out for. But at the same time, you obviously have to balance the level of compliance you're trying to achieve with the size of company that you're working in. And, we had a limited number of locations. So, well, what I was trying to track, I suppose, or was just to make sure that, are people spending do we have people traveling who are spending large numbers of days in one specific location? And so they're likely to be triggering, going over tax thresholds, or do we need to do something, particularly in the European context, with their kind of social security and having kind of, A1 certificates and so on. And also the posted workers directive kind of requirement in a European context. I was, although I knew that achieving compliance with all of these different things was a kind of more of a desired state, and it would be more state. I think when starting in a small company, and when you do have the opportunity to start from scratch, although you can manage on with much more like manual processes and so on to begin with, if you know that the company wants to scale, and often, there's going to be a future aim to kind of IPO or something, you want to make sure that the building blocks that you put in place are going to allow you to be fully compliant in the future. So even if you're not trying to kind of push that right from the beginning, that's where you want to get to. So with the business travel, just small things like introducing kind of labels so that everyone who books a trip has to put the reason for their travel. And that
Love
was
that.
probably more related to the posted workers directive, because there are some types of travel where you need to report and some where you don't. And actually, that was helpful internally for us, just tracking um, internal versus external travel, and whether there's a real business need. Do we need to incur that level of cost? So that was also helpful for the finance team.
I love
But
that.
that was like a small thing I could do in the beginning, which is starting to set us up for when we are able to track this in a more active way. The
Yeah,
trips labeled, I can do some kind of then analysis, pull some of the data around that and start to kind of work out where the risk areas are.
I love that. You mentioned the sort of fitting compliance, like risk reward to the stage and size of company. And I think this is something a lot of people struggle with is like, 100% compliance is great, but it's really expensive and it's really time consuming to get to that stage. How did you sort of think about, what is the right level of compliance? I know very few companies that are 100% compliant, not many that
Yeah.
are happy with 0% compliant. How do you think
Yeah.
about like where on the spectrum you wanted to try to get to?
Um, I think a lot of that is actually determined by kind of practical, what can you manage?
Yeah, I
Um,
love it.
it always
True.
it helps to start with, okay, helps to start with an understanding of what would complete compliance look like, because obviously in an ideal world you would get there, but then you have to weigh that up against, okay, but is that overly kind of burdensome? Is that going to stop us from achieving the business aims by doing that level of compliance? Are we putting too much red tape and requirements and, stopping people from moving or doing the travel that they need, or whatever the thing might be, good way, so that we're kind of stopping the business from functioning. You definitely don't want to be perceived as a
Yeah.
blocker. Sadly, you often are perceived like that in HR, unfortunately. But so you want to get that balance right of kind of being that advisor to the business and then coming to you for help and understanding the compliance, but not feeling like you're overly blocking them or,
Yes.
you know, putting a lot of
Yeah.
admin on whatever the thing might be. And it is also just to do with, what can you as a kind of an HR team or whatever the function is that has to kind of administer the compliance requirements, what can you kind of manage? And I think from the beginning, that was one of the other my kind of main principle applied to everything, was just to kind of keep it simple, because, I'd worked with a lot of companies who had very involved kind of approaches to assignments, or like tax equalization and so on. And they can very very extensive policy documents around every kind of nuance of everything. And obviously, like in a big company where you have large populations, you definitely do need to document things a lot more and have a lot more detail. But then for a company of our size, complete overkill. Like, no one needs that. So just writing very simple, easy to understand kind of guidelines for different assignment types or local transfers. I tried
Mm,
to transfer everyone local to local with no kind of assignment, so that there's
yes.
some work required upfront, so you support the relocation and help someone to move in a really kind of good way so that they can settle in well. But I'm not triggering ongoing like monitoring costs, intervention
I love
by
that.
like payroll. Especially, I think where I've seen things go wrong is that the payroll setup is very complicated, and payrolls can't cope with international aspects
Ah, it's
virtually
so
ever. So yeah,
ever.
and if the expat doesn't get paid or something goes wrong, that's almost the worst thing that can happen.
Oh,
So
yeah.
just keeping that as straightforward as possible just helped us to kind of manage
Mm,
things. And so that would be my approach to the kind of
I love that.
compliance as well,
Yeah.
you know.
Getting
Yeah.
buy-in and on that, I think that's, yeah, definitely a trigger topic for me. You we see so many folk in the industry relying on traditional assignment types that, A, can be quite expensive and B, complicated. How did you tried to local everything, which is always preferred if possible. Were there times where you
Yeah.
thought, "Oh, actually, in the past, I would have done this as an assignment, but we can do that as a local to local." What were your learning from going predominantly PAM transfer local to local?
Yeah, I think, I'd seen a lot of companies shift that way over the sort of previous years anyway. So I think I felt less, maybe less pressure to accommodate, like, kind of an assignment setup. Particularly working with, I think when I was, based in Stockholm and working with a lot more kind of tech companies and so on, they
Yeah.
were also going on that route of just making things. I mean, it was largely driven by cost, but, the effect was also simplifying the way they were doing its assignments and doing the local to local. So I think I felt like because I'd seen a lot of other companies doing it, I felt like
Yeah.
I had permission to do it that way as well.
Yeah.
Uh, I think the pushback you get, particularly in Sweden, where there's a very, strong kind of
Social
social kind of
security.
net of one
Yeah.
is, is it I wondered, like, would people be okay with coming out with Swedish Social Security and so on? But I mean, internally, when I am kind of, explaining my approach to kind of my boss and the CFO and so on, it's very easy to swing because, from an employer perspective, Swedish Social Security is so expensive. I could run very easy comparisons and show that it was way cheaper for us to get someone out of Swedish Social Security in virtually every case. It was gonna be cheaper where they were to. And also I can kind of, sell that to the individual as well if they push back on me because it's kind of like, "Look, we have X amount of budget for the total cost of your kind of move, and if we pay this whole chunk to the Swedish government, that's a lot less that's going in your
It's
pocket.
I
So
I
if we
love
put you onto a local contract, then actually a lot more of that can kind of be like, go to you." And so
it's
that was in the end, it was to sell actually.
I love that. It's quite because so often such great tactical advice. People so often think, "Oh, no one will move if they have to, like, move off their local pension, move off their local social security." You're making such a golden nugget point that is like, actually, there's more money to go around and more benefit to go around that you can make it a win-win to everyone and, like,
Wow.
sort of you can make it a win-win to everyone, and B, in lots of companies, like, a move that will happen as a pound transfer that costs 20 or $50,000, that will happen. If it's a $300,000 assignment with tax equalization, it just won't happen. People just find another solution, and that's the crazy thing is just, like, don't be beholden to traditional assignments, like, try it, and people are more willing than I think traditionally people think about.
Definitely, and I think as well, when you have a kind of a younger workforce, I suppose that was probably also that's the benefit of working in a kind of a tech or scale-up type environment. You do tend to have, like, younger workforce, and so they're not and also these days, I think tax equalization worked kind of back in the day when people had, their entire careers at one company, and so they're kind of and always to a home base or whatever the thing
Yeah.
might be. But these days, people are they work for 2, 3 years at a company, they then kind of move on to the next place. And I think people are just generally more kind of mobile now, aren't they? So they don't have that sort of and I don't think that people are so worried about putting pension savings into
It's
the same pot, that kind of
yeah.
thing. I Today people think about it a lot less.
It's well, yeah, and certainly about, like, I'm building towards my pension pot at one company that I want to be
Yeah.
continuous and grow towards my final salary pension pot or whatever. It is a very different, mindset and actually can unlock so much more mobility because then, it's just a lot more affordable to do perm transfers than
Yeah.
assignments.
Yeah.
Um, Tell us about your own move, Sharon. You moved to Sweden and then you moved to Austin, Texas, to pretty sort of different relocations. What were they like, and what did you learn?
Yeah. Um, so I mean, like at a high level, super fantastic experience. And I think this is what's really kind of I'd always sort of enjoyed working kind of with mobility when I was sort of starting off and was kind of working in London. And I never before I moved myself, I think I used to sort of work with expats who would literally go from like one place to another and on these kind of back to back schemes and they would never kind of come home. And I used to find why
Yeah.
didn't they
What
kinda
about
come back
home?
to home?
Yeah.
Yeah. But now that, having had the opportunity to kind of move from London to Stockholm, and then as you say, now I'm based in Austin, I think I totally get that because it's so fun. It's such an amazing experience to kind of get a totally different perspective on the world and to live in a different country, culture, kind of approach to society. And it's yeah, it takes you outside your comfort zone. I think it sort of puts you into a much more kind of challenge and like growth mindset personally. So I think the personal benefits of doing it are massive. And of course, it's not smooth sailing the whole time. It can be kind of difficult to settle in. And I've moved with a family. I have 3 kids. So that's also something that often people kind of worry about, like the impact on the kids. When we moved to Stockholm, they were quite little, so they were
Yeah.
4, 5, and 7. But then when we've moved this time to US, they're now kind of teenagers, and so that's a whole kind of different thing.
Yeah.
But seeing benefits for them as well, that they're so kind of confident, resilient, able to sort of
Mm,
meet new people, slot into new situations,
I
just
love that.
generally kind of be quite sort of self-motivated and take
Yeah.
things in their stride. I can see that the sort of life skills that they've got from doing these kind of
Yeah.
international moves, just like, I was way into my kind of adult life before I was anywhere near to getting those kind of, and sort of insights into the way that things are different. I mean, it's been quite like funny as you can imagine moving from Sweden to Texas
I
specifically
I
because it's
mean,
literally
yeah, tell me about that because
po-
that is crazy different. Tell us something fun or surprising about that change.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's polar, like, opposites in every respect.
Yeah.
And I think it's, um what I've seen with the kids is that they have a healthy appreciation that things are done in very different ways, and what they've been kind of taught in school, in Sweden, it's you're pretty much taught that, socialism is good and capitalism is bad.
Yeah.
You come to the US, taught the kind of exact opposite of that thing.
Yeah.
So I think they find it quite, Sweden is almost like a country of sort of like an evil socialist country. He's almost communist.
But yeah, that's so
But so
crazy.
it's still make you quite funny and come and report back to it.
Yeah.
And so then they can know that, okay, there's pros and cons to these different things. And yeah. But yeah, the whole sort of the experience of being an expat, I think now I've done it myself.
Yeah.
I get so excited when relocating people and I love kind of engaging with them and getting them excited about it. And obviously people are nervous, but just giving them the kind of reassurance that
Yeah.
whatever happens, they will have an amazing experience and they will
Uh,
learn so much. It will be there'll be lots of positives they can take from it. And I think kind of most importantly, like these type of decisions are not reversible. I think when you make the first decision to move, you feel like you're making such a massive change in your life that
yeah.
I don't know. It's like a mentality that this can never be undone, and
Yeah.
but of course, it's the case.
It's
If you
not the
don't get
case.
on and it doesn't work, just go back again.
It's so
It's not that
true.
big a deal.
It's not that big a deal, and I do feel it's like it's less of a big deal than ever before. Do you know, it's like it's easy to communicate with people back home. It's easy to get back in most instances if you need to. It's not like you're sort of packing and never gonna see anyone ever again. It's like if you go try
Yeah,
it for a couple of years, if it doesn't work out, come back. It is as you say, it's not like it's really not really a one-way door at all. It's very reversible. And
yeah,
I'm so
yeah.
doughy-eyed just about how amazing it is, like, both socially and professionally. It just puts you in circumstances that, are, like, you just don't encounter at home. Yeah, but
No.
what's, like, the craziest thing you've seen in your expat days that's been fun?
So I don't know if it's, like, crazy per se, but you certainly, meet some extremely interesting people, I think, when you sort of are in a sort of an expat environment. And when we first moved to Stockholm, our kids were in an international school in the beginning. And so we were part of a kind of a really great expat community
Yeah,
around the international school. And, there's just such a, like, broad variety of people that you kind of come
Mm.
across, and lots of them kind of, often people who are selected to be expats and moved by their companies, obviously quite kind of successful and accomplished. So they've all done these kind of like, it's just so interesting. And a lot of them have moved from lots of different countries. So they bring lots of different experiences with them. But I think in the early days, one of my girls had a friend who was from South Korea. And so getting to chat to her mum about what life is like in South Korea is, the type of insight that you would never normally get from,
Yes.
a culture I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
So you get those kind of very like interesting opportunities to learn about other cultures. You also meet people who, there was one dad in the school who, his officially he worked for the kind of Swiss tourist board,
Yeah.
but he spoke 10 languages. He had very
Mhm.
extensive international travel, and when there was like a forest school the parents could go along to, in Sweden, and, his kind of survival skills were second to none. The speed with which he could climb trees or build a survival shelter,
You're like,
like,
wow.
we did what he actually did for a living.
Yeah. That's crazy. You're like, okay, a little bit suspicious. Yeah, you get to
Yeah,
definitely
so
get
so
to
that was quite funny. And then we also found that apart from the expats at the school, it was quite prestigious in Sweden to send your kids to an international school if you were Swedish.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
so we found that the Swedish parent population, we didn't know who any of them were, but they often turned out, or a chunk of them ended up being people who were either some of the kind of wealthiest or kind of famous like Swedish people who, again, we didn't know.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
then you sort of get to know who they actually are after a period of time. And we have some, like, funny memories of, like, Swedish midsummer is very big, and they have a whole thing where they have these funny kind of midsummer songs, and they had us all at the school, like, dancing around a maypole, and you realize that you're kind of dancing around a maypole doing, like, a Swedish frog dance song with, one of the guys from Swedish House Mafia.
Wow.
So
Crazy.
you have
Check
those
you
kind
out.
of really real moments, which is
That's
just
very
fun.
surreal. Uh,
Yeah, really.
that is very surreal. Well, it's West the Whistle. In the context of, people listening to this are thinking, "Oh, I want to move, but I don't know how to make it happen." In both your instances, did you move with a job that sponsored you? Did you do internal transfers in your second case? How did you actually make it happen for those that are like, "Oh, I'd love to, but I don't know how to do that?"
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just being, like, open to
Yeah.
opportunities when they present themselves. We as a like, myself and my husband, we both love to travel, and I think when we started out early in our careers, we both really thought we would like to live abroad, but the opportunity never kind of presented itself. We then had kind of kids, and we thought, "Oh, we've sort of missed our chance to do it now." But then actually, my husband came home from work one day and kind of said to me, "Oh, you'll never guess what my boss has asked me. He wants me to go and like start up a kind of Nordic arm of our business and move to Sweden." And I told, I sort of,
Wow.
as if, and I said, "Oh, yeah, well, okay, why don't we?" And he was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I didn't think you'd say
Cool.
yes to that."
Yeah.
And at the time I was working with, I had a big Swedish client, so I was actually working a lot with the Swedish team, and so it actually felt like quite a natural thing for me as well. And although it didn't, kind of work out with the company I was at, I sort of said to him, like, "I won't move unless I have a job as well. I'm not gonna be" this is a horrible mobility term, but a trailing spouse.
Yeah, exactly. Very legacy now.
Let's
We don't call it that.
accompanying spouse instead.
Accompanying partner now.
Exactly, but
Yeah.
in those days, it always used to
Yeah,
be
it
like a
was.
trailing
Yeah.
spouse.
Yeah, yeah.
So and I was like, "I'm not gonna be a trailing spouse.
Yeah,
I
quite
won't
right.
move unless I get a job too." So then, because I was working in a kind of a Big Four international sort of role and environment, I was able to kind of make connections to speak to other, to sort of find an opportunity. But I think, yeah, it is just about being sort of open and putting yourself out there. And that was I very much took from that. Um, you have to kind of push a bit, which was not my natural inclination, but having more of a mindset of kind of, "What have I got to lose? Let's go after that opportunity," which
Yeah.
I probably didn't have before, to
Yes.
kind of make happen. So we
Yeah.
sort of moved, and we moved just pre the official Brexit, so we were able to move
Nice.
quite easily in terms of
Get in there.
immigration and
Well
so on.
done.
Yeah, but then when it came to moving to to Austin. Einride had its kind of US presence in Austin. We sort of could sit well as soon as I started at Einride, my husband kind of said to me, "Well, oh, Austin's such a cool city. I would love to live there one day." And so then it was in our minds that actually, maybe we would like to move again, and could we go
Yeah.
there? And actually, as kind of time progressed, we were growing our business in the US. We needed a more kind of senior HR presence there, and I was actually relocating a whole kind of like Swedish management team to the US and a
Wow.
bunch of engineers as well. And so it's sort of like
It just
it
worked out.
kind of it
Yeah.
worked out. There was an opportunity for me where it kind of made sense. But again, it was probably us searching out that opportunity, and it worked for my husband as well. So we were both able to kind of make it work. But I would say we did. It was kind of initiated by us, but then it has to work for the business as
Ex
well.
Yeah, it's so true. It's probably had you said, "We want to move to South Korea," they might have been like, not really relevant for us right now." But as you say, like, if you're willing to put your hand up and it makes sense, it's kind of like yeah, it doesn't always need to be a strict sort of, they tap you on the shoulder. You can sort of say, "Hey, this would make sense," and create those opportunities as
Yeah.
well, and it's like
Yeah.
those sorts of gray
Absolutely.
areas that the person's willing and it works for the business. It's so sweet and so inspiring, Sharon. I love just hearing about the passion for the space because it's so fun meeting people from different cultures and hearing you sort
Yeah.
of speak so glowingly about your kids and bringing them up in different cultures. It is really inspiring for our industry, and you're going to love your question from a previous guest because, believe it or not, your question is, if you could move to any country in the world, where would you move? So you've done a few moves now, but if you obviously haven't been in the US for too long, but if you were
Yeah.
to move again, where would you go to?
Well, I mean, I can probably answer this having already put some level of thought into it. Like,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be a move because we're kind of obviously now quite settled and uh, in a more sensible family place right now for our kids to kind of go to school and so on. But we definitely have a retirement plan to have some kind of beach bar in the Caribbean slash
Wow.
boutique hotel. I will admit that we have already looked at boutique hotels for sale in Mexico.
Wow, I
So,
love that.
I think, we're not the type of people who are gonna, at some point in the future, just retire and do nothing. So we
Yes,
thought about what we'd like to do. So yeah, I
so
can't give you
fun.
a specific location
I
yet,
love that,
but the
but a
US was
beach bar.
definitely a step. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was definitely a stepping stone towards our, eventual retirement plan,
I
and
love that.
it will be something along those lines.
Well, let myself and the global mobility community know when you open this beach bar, and we can come and celebrate. Possibly the best answer ever to the final question. I love that. Completely unsurprising, Sharon. Thank you for coming on and thank you for staying so far beyond a bit beyond time. That's been so interesting hearing about your experiences. Like starting like truly what is like such a modern program covering the full range of like permanent transfers to work from anywhere to remote work to everything that goes into that modern mobility. So well done on well done on that. Thank you for sharing so openly. Good job by you and thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, great to be here. Thanks, Paul.
Cheers, Sharon. Awesome.